Hi everyone, welcome to the session on unintended alignment in LLMs. And so far we looked at examples that we don't want our LLMs to hallucinate, don't want them to give wrong answers, and what they do sometimes is abstain from an answer. This can also be alignment, so we want them to be aligned to human values, to morale. We don't want them to explain to you how to build a bomb. We don't want them to give very, wrong answers to you. And there are many processes in LLM training and application that try to improve the alignment of LLMs. However, there can also sometimes be unintended alignment, and we will discuss about specifically two papers that discuss that. And let's start with the first one. It's called State Media Control Influences LLMs. It's the one paper that was published in Nature, and it basically does various studies that basically have multiple statements. Or what they find out is first that state-coordinated media is in open training data. This basically predicts that also LLMs memorize this state-coordinated media. And since this media is in the training data, it also increases the pro-authoritarian responses of certain LLMs, since they were also trained on this propaganda that was happening. All that also adds to the fact that LLMs respond differently by different languages. They figure out that this actually happens in real prompts, in real applications. And what's also interesting, since LLMs respond differently by language, we can also see that the media freedom is correlated with the LLM responses. So depending on in which language you prompt your LLM, you will get different kind of answers. Specifically, it looks like that on the x-axis we have the media freedom score, from very serious, so those are countries where you have very low media freedom, to very good. And here on the y-axis we have responses that are more favorable to the target language prompt. So basically, if we prompt or ask for completions in the target language, we will get more positive results towards the government, basically, than if we ask in English. Okay, and you can see the more or the worse the media freedom is, the more likely it is that there will be more favorable answers by the LLMs. And you can see that in various models where, the exact size is different, but we see that there actually is a difference in what language do we prompt the models, and also it's more positive towards the governments if you ask them in certain languages, if the media freedom is very low there. Okay, and the problem with general alignment methods is that they are dual-use technologies. So, for example, if a model abstains from an answer when you ask it how to build a bomb, this is something that we actually want to, because we don't want LLMs to provide illegal information or dangerous information to you, for example. However, what is also being observed right now is that if you ask, for example, what had happened on Tiananmen Square in 1989, the AI will also not answer this. And again, we don't really know if certain answers are blocked because of high uncertainty or because it is specifically used as alignment. And the general problem is, since someone needs to decide what is reasonable to be blocked or what do we want to block, people can also just decide to use that for example, countries could use it for propaganda reasons, or certain individual companies offering those LLMs could also use that to weaponize those alignment pipelines. Okay, now we look at how it's already observed that this is being done and where it's happening. This is a screenshot from Sarah Ball's website. So additionally to the paper, she published a nice website where it's a little easier to follow what they say. They also have like a short video on there. So I very much recommend you to look at it yourself. The link is also in the website's course overview that you will have. But yeah, we will look at this part here in this video. So basically what is observed is that state actors actually influence the pre-training and the post-training. Pre-training is basically that it was observed that Chinese models like DeepSeek or the Ernie bot are made to refuse discussions of politically sensitive topics. And one reason for this is that, for example, Chinese AI companies filtered out so-called problematic information and basically influenced the training data that the model saw. And also in post-training, there was a refusal data set of certain prompts that are supposed to be refused to discuss. And this was given by the China's cyberspace regulator. And many of those prompts that should be refused target political ideology or criticism of the Communist Party. However, not only state actors influence what is being blocked by LLMs, but also the model providers can have a big influence in inference time. For example, by editing the system prompt. The system prompt is basically a prompt that every question that you ask an LLM will first have the system prompt. It says usually something like, you are a helpful LLM, you are supposed to give helpful answers, be nice, and so on. However, Elon Musk, for example, tried to fix its LLM Grok with basically opinions that he disagrees with by just changing the system prompt. So this model was then steered to promote his political agenda, and this actually unintendedly triggered some anti-Semitic responses. And those are very catastrophic side effects that happen just because you change this system prompt. And when basically this happens without like public oversight or without the public knowing what happens, there are definitely a lot of misuse pathways where no retraining is required. So imagine there is maybe an election happening and you change your system prompt to your favorable party. This could in theory happen with very simple alignment methods. And global contamination in pre-training basically relates to the first study that I presented to you, that basically state coordinated media is in training data, and this leads to basically self-censorship of the LLMs, even though they were never specifically trained to do so, compared to what's happening in, for example, this refusal data set. So you can do this on purpose, but even if you don't do this on purpose, you see self-censorship. So for example, when LLMs were prompted in simplified Chinese without being designed to abstain from certain topics, they were abstaining from certain discussions just because the state actors were filtering out certain topics from media. So basically it's also invisible in a way because it was never specifically done so, and it still influences the models. I know this all sounds very scary, but I'm sure it's very important for all of us to understand the risks and the behaviors that can happen when using LLMs, especially commercial ones where we don't have access to certain weights, for example, and we don't really know how the system prompt looks like. But this was not a paper that only criticized the status quo, but it also gave us 3 directions forward. Namely, they call for verifiable alignment, so there should be some kind of public oversight. And also model pluralism is important because not a single model can achieve full neutrality. So there should really be a genuine market competition. So there actually should be multiple providers of LLMs and not only like the 5 big tech companies that currently do so. And this relates to monopolies because any kind of monopoly over information is dangerous regardless of who holds them, whether it's like a state that influences what kind of news media can be published or whether it's a commercial company that decides what models can tell. And also they call for awareness, and this is also one of the reasons why we're talking about that here, is that there is literally literacy needed about the AI risks. So users and researchers should know what kind of risks they face when they use LLMs. And if you also do research on LLMs, taking this impact statement seriously is a big step. So when you work on alignment methods, for example, you should actually also be aware of the risks there are. Okay, then we will end the session on a less scary topic, namely sycophancy. Sycophancy is the tendency of LLM models to be very positive with the users. So they usually enforce whatever you say and are very nice, and they don't want to disagree with you, which is nice for humans because humans oftentimes don't like to be corrected or improved. And this is also the reason why in this reinforcement learning from human feedback, humans gave feedback that if the LLM was very nice to you, they usually preferred that answer. However, the problem with that is that if we optimize for this kind of agreement, this could in turn hurt the truthfulness. So, for example, there is some research from Professor Krasniqi from TUM in Munich, where they do research on educational LLMs. So you want to give the LLM to students as like a tutor and help them study certain topics. And the big problem is that if the LLMs don't improve the mistakes of the students just because they were trained to be agreeable and nice, it can actually hinder the development and the learning experience of those students. And also there were studies that showed that if you increase the warmth of the output of LLMs, it actually raised error rates, so it wasn't as reliable anymore. Sycophancy also creates hidden uncertainties, because the answer depends on the user's revealed preference, and apparent agreement is not independent corroboration. So basically, if you just say, I believe A, the LLM will agree with you. But if you just say the very opposite, the LLM will agree again. However, your evidence stayed constant all the time. So basically, you have problems there as well. As a conclusion for this session, I want to focus that bias is both an error and an uncertainty problem. So if a group, in our opinion, is underrepresented or filtered out in the training data, also like global confidence score can basically hide reliability, because the LLM just relates to what it thinks based on the training data and so on, but this does not necessarily relate to the real world. Models can also reproduce stereotypes or treat dialects differently, which is also a bias, and can increase uncertainties and error rates depending on, for example, if you prompt it in a dialect. And we talked a lot about how political outputs can reflect the data that it was trained on, or some actions that institutions did. Okay, with that, we want to thank the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft and the funding, and this is the copyright note, I mean. Thanks everyone, goodbye.